Hello! Welcome to this next episode of This Big Meaningful Life. We have this as a once-a-month experience in order to kind of hear somebody else's story, and hopefully as we hear those stories, it resonates with something that churns inside of us. We feel inspired to move towards our own stuff. And so I have with me today Dave Schmelzer of Blue Ocean Faith. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Dave for a moment. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Christina.
It's good to be with you.
And with you.
Tell me a little bit about what you do. What is your role?
I am the executive director of something called Blue Ocean Faith. And I would characterize that as a couple of things. Blue Ocean Faith started as sort of just a conversation, a very postmodern word, among people interested in faith but in non-traditional settings. And so I spent a lot of my life a few years back doing conferencing to talk about whatever it means to have faith in non-traditional settings and creative approaches to seeing that happen. And a lot of church people wanted to talk to me despite them being in traditional settings.
Yeah.
And then we decided to kind of remove ourselves from a wonderful church that we helped found and loved and continue to love, to give more attention to this. And as that happened, a network of churches formed around us as well. And so it's become a conversation about faith in non-traditional settings and a network of churches who are interested in that.
Yes. And that's actually where I met Dave. We met in this church that he's referencing years back now. 2004, probably.
I was thinking like 1842.
Yes, in 1842, because we have aged
yes.
very well.
I know. On that standard, I look really good.
Yes.
But, yeah.
So, from that, tell me a little bit about the evolution of what you were doing, from being a pastor to what you're doing now.
You know, I think I've always had kind of an entrepreneurial bent, sometimes what people in some church traditions would call an apostolic bent, where I've liked starting things. And even this church that we met in got started through me and several other people, and by no means just me and my wife, but I was part of it. And I think that energy, let's put on a show, let's do something great, was a lot of the fun, I think, of doing it. And then it went great, and it went so well that I think our church became a thing, like an actual thing that needed to be loved and nurtured and preserved. And I just think some of that entrepreneurial energy became something that sounded really appealing to pursue, and to find somebody who would be a great person to follow. I mean, I don't want to type whatever they would do, but someone who would enjoy the church in that phase and love it. And so, all that said, we moved to where you and I are doing this interview now, to California, with thoughts of like maybe media would be helpful in having this big conversation about faith. That was probably the main thought, and we've done that a bit. We started an online thing called Horatio, which kind of has found various iterations and now is largely hosting a podcast that we do called Blue Ocean World, which is on a brief hiatus, but hopefully shortly after you see this, it'll be back going strong. Yes, Blue Ocean World
is great.
Yes, and but anyway, so that got us out here and got us in a bunch of conversations. We've started a variety of different things out here. We've done gatherings with neighbors around these themes, and we've had an ongoing small group, which has sometimes been quite a big group around these themes. At one point, that group wanted to start a church. That didn't quite take, but we did this very experimental thing, working with our namesakes in this group called Blue Ocean Business Strategy, who are multinational, who encouraged us to kind of explore their stuff from a church point of view, a religion point of view, and that was right up our alley, because we're trying to do experimental things around faith. And so we have a pilot group around that stuff happening out here now, which is largely focused on contemplative spirituality, kind of a meditation-y, but also a very warm-hearted group around God, sort of thing.
Yes. Yes, in point of fact, like we've sort of all been exploring this contemplative meditation stuff together over the last year.
Yes, I'm not talking to you as if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, for sure.
It's so good. So this entrepreneurial stuff that you're talking about, did you know you were entrepreneurial when you started church planting? Or was that something you realized over time?
Well, I probably, by the time I was in college, I was a part of a Christian group there that was very into tests, personality profiles. And one of their tests, I'm trying to remember if I remember the name of it. It was, somebody will write in the name of this thing, but it was a test, it was a what are you good at test. And the thing that my thing came out in college was create/bring into being.
Okay.
It was the thing that showed up my history, and I think that's really borne itself out, obviously. So for a while, I was a playwright for about 10 years. So I was writing, creating new plays, and helping them get produced. And so that was a creative energy, but also a startup and sort of energy to get stuff going. And then when the church thing happened, I stumbled into it, which you know the story, and some of our listeners may well know the story, that I was not planning to be the pastor of the church. The man who was planning to be the pastor of the church, it just didn't quite work out. And so I was doing playwriting stuff even in Boston. And then people kind of turned to me and said, well, Dave, if we're going to have a church, I suppose you're going to do it. And then so I decided to do it, and with grace, and a bunch of that energy to create stuff sort of kicked in. And so I suppose that cemented my sense that, oh, I guess the whole create, bring into being thing is something I enjoy and maybe I'm good at. So I found it out by doing, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right? It becomes increasingly clear as you keep walking through.
Indeed. Yeah.
So you're naming some of these challenges, but here we are. We're still moving along. We're doing this thing. So what keeps you going in the midst of the difficulty you experience?
I have spiritual things that keep me going, both practices and kind of experiences and convictions. I'll start there. I feel like it's probably a cliche to say God has always given me what I need, has always provided for me, and many church traditions would celebrate that as a virtue, but I think that's true for me, is that again, I keep referring to Grace, my wife, but she's always been a part of all these choices. And in those choices, we've taken a ton of what the heck sort of choices. And thus far, at the very least, having the means to make it in life has always happened. Yeah. And the broadest sense of God's promises have really come true. And so that keeps me going. It's like, well, why would that change with new risks? We have plenty of new things we're trying now that have their own risks that are involved. But thus far, it's, God's been there. So I think that would be a big thing that keeps me going. I think spiritual practices that have been meaningful to me, many of which you've participated in, have been kind of relational among other practices, but there's been a lot of relational stuff with God that I've enjoyed. So I've enjoyed being a person who talks to God and senses God talking back to me, and I have a variety of ways I try to figure that out. And then recently, along as you have, I've learned more about this meditative, contemplative spirituality, and I think all that's been really helpful in current challenges. That I think I have not at all dropped I wonder what God would say about this way of life. That's a big part of every day of my life, and just trying to do whatever God seems to be saying has been important to me. Yeah. But then also the whole meditative thing's been useful. Of wow, I'm learning how to identify things that are keeping me from experiencing a joyful, confident life, and let that stuff go, which then kind of frees the deck for God to speak to me more.
Yeah. Back in the day, I would be driving maybe to work, and you would be prayer walking.
Oh, wow.
So I would, and literally, by the way, talking the prayers. There would just be a person walking down the street.
So my chihuahua keeps getting out, so I will introduce you. This is Roxy. Roxy is desperate to be on my lap at the moment, so say hello. I'll put Roxy down here, but you'll notice Roxy.
She's absolutely adorable, and my animals often make it into shots, so you're in good company.
Okay, good.
So yeah, and now it's been meditation, right?
Not exclusively. That has not what you saw me walking and mouthing the words still happens. So it's not been it's not replaced that. But in addition to that, yes, meditation's been super useful, and I came into it, as everything in my life I came into through sort of bizarre, unexpected ways, that it was just doing this project with these business people about saying, gee, we're kind of trying to figure out how our stuff applies to the religion sphere, which for me is just seeing whatever God can offer people expanded sphere. And as we explored that here in the west side of LA, we just discovered, well, if there's an open door, the open door is in that. Our neighbors tended to have Buddha statues, even if they hadn't grown up in Japan. Very little church going in this part of the world, which is one of the reasons we moved here. We kind of have felt like we have a role to play in places where there's not a ton of church going. And so we thought, I don't know, how do we take that information that church is not of interest, but boy, contemplation is. And then I realized I didn't know anything about it, so I had not really pursued that. I pursued a lot of relational stuff with God, but not a whole lot of stillness. I think I was the sort of person who more felt like I wanted, strangely, to amp myself up, not chill myself out. And but boy, what a winner! I just learned, because I started reading books. I tend to be a reader, and I read a book and thought, well, that seems like a good idea. Let's try that, and it really was. So it's been great.
No, we found the same thing. Life is busy, just inordinately busy, and so we started every 3 weeks or so having a contemplative space instead of the regular. And people were saying, oh, it feels like a spa. I just love this atmosphere.
Yeah.
I need that. So and I need it. Just think about my own experience of life that is so busy. And as many of you know, I'm a singer, right? So people that are musicians, they really can get caught up in the music and how they're doing and what other people should do with it. And so this is a beautiful resource, meditation and contemplation.
To be sure.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about who your companions are. Like, who comes alongside of you? What are your supports, either in the past or even now? How would you describe that part of your life?
Well, I'm like all human beings. I'm so grateful for all the people who come alongside and all the support, yourself included. Back when you're running a church that's growing a lot and kind of big and doing a lot of stuff, there's just a sense of all hands on deck as you get this thing going, and some of those people are hired, and some of those people are volunteers, or some of those people are just friendly cheerer honors, but there's kind of a gang of folks who are involved in a large growing thing. And so I've experienced that in my life with great delight. And if any of you are watching now, hi, you're awesome, love you. Then you go to a place which is, in one sense, going on a complete entrepreneurial quest, which was our move to California, where so many people have supported us to make it possible and have encouraged us and kind of cheered us on in the endeavor and asked how they can help. A lot of those people are across the country. And so then you arrive here and you just kind of meet people. And so we've had casual supporters, and then we've had an increasingly robust kind of group of folks who've just said, we're kind of going to stick with you wherever this journey goes and going to hang. And so some of those people helped us start this church and then are still with us now saying, all right, we're learning this contemplative thing. Let's learn this contemplative thing together. Yeah. And so we have our weekly gathering of those folks, and which... at least at this point, if you're in LA, join us. You could look at this thing called the Spiritual.Center.
Yes.
And it'll tell you how to get there. Yeah. But can I promote one more thing too?
Absolutely.
We have this thing now which you'd have to find on either the Spiritual.Center site or on the blueoceanfaith.org website. But that will ultimately be rolling out probably weekly in social media, called 5-Minute Spirituality. And we're just learning so much stuff. We kind of felt like there's one of our opportunities or responsibilities or something seem to be to offer a little bit to any people who care about this sort of stuff or care about us, kind of little snippets of what we're learning, some little 5-minute chunks. Some pretty interesting stuff that was all new to me that we're offering, these little 5-minute videos about contemplative spirituality, but in a Christian tradition. It's broad-based. We learn from a variety of traditions, but it's kind of filtered through my own experience, which is Christian.
Yeah.
So anyway, 5-Minute Spirituality you can find on either the blueoceanfaith.org site or on the Spiritual.Center site, and they will also be rolled out weekly.
Yeah, and I will put those in the description of this video so you'll be able to find them easily. It's a little bit about your companions.
So, people follow alongside, along, of course, with, again, the oft-mentioned Grace and our kids and things like that, and
right.
Roxy. But we have a gang of folks who've tracked pretty closely with us and have been very supportive and on board.
Yeah, it's got the hero's. We talk about the hero's journey a lot, right?
I've heard of that.
Right? Yes, I got it from you.
There's a hero. There's a journey.
Yes. No way did I just come up with it. That's for sure. But sometimes we've talked about it in terms of the Lord of the Rings, and there's that moment where he's all wrapped up in the cocoon, right? So companions are a really big deal. They're not nothing. Like, we need those people that are there with us. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit, if you could go back and talk to a younger version of yourself, what would you tell that younger version of yourself?
I think I would tell that younger version of myself that everything I've ever learned along the way that is sort of focused on my internal world is useful. Mm-hmm. And so, not that things that focus on my external world. So at one point I led a large staff team, which you'd be well familiar with. So I did a ton of reading on management and on how do you do that, and how do you lead a church. Obviously, I've read, I think, libraries of books on leading church or on God or on theology. So there's plenty of stuff you can learn that's useful professionally or that's useful organizationally, that's in your external world, which I'm all for. Right. But maybe it's because now I'm a dad and some of my kids are teenagers. And I think I was just talking to a guy at a gathering, people came around the world to, that you and I were just a part of here in LA. Yeah. And this one guy's sort of an expert because he works with college students on, is it Gen Z, the current one?
Gen Z.
And I've got some Gen Z kids. And what he said is, Yeah, mental health's a big issue. Social media, people often say, has kind of fundamentally sort of changed the mental health of a whole generation in a way that's never been true in world history. And I think we have some of that in my family, where I'm like trying to encourage people. And what I often tell them is, whatever you come across that helps you feel encouraged, feel good, feel hopeful, do that. And they'll often say, well, Dad, you're trying to make me more religious, or things like that. I say, yes, of course, am I trying to make you religious? Of course I am. But that said, anything that you like, that makes you feel good, if it's a friend, if it's things like that.
Yeah.
And I think I would have told my younger self the same thing, that I undersold how important my own internal world was to my external world going well.
Yeah.
Because in my internal world, if I felt hope, if I felt God, if I felt kind of the deck's clear, that I wasn't like trying to deal with my own anxieties and things like that, I actually found myself noticing opportunities that I wouldn't have noticed if I felt stressed, or if I felt unhappy, or if I felt whatever. And so I guess that's what I'd say is, whatever helps you feel better is worth pursuing, because your life goes better, people around you go better, and then you feel better as well.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think it's helpful, right, to look back and say, what do I know now that would have helped me so much more? And then hopefully that like feeds us, that we don't all have to have the same. But sometimes you have to live it. That's just the reality.
Of course. Yes, of course. And I think probably some of the meditative, contemplative stuff you are talking about has been so useful, because like that is a lot about that, right? About notice what's going on, all new to me, and so helpful.
Yeah, you often talk about the notion of the waterfall, like observe it from behind the difficulty, which has been a useful, I don't know if it's a metaphor or a teaching, but it's a useful picture for me.
Yeah.
In any case. It's like, yes, there's craziness. I don't have to put myself right under the rushing water of the craziness. I can stand back from it.
That is one, I stole that from some, probably Buddhist teacher.
It's
But
so helpful.
yeah, that's a very helpful idea. That I think that specifically it's not just the craziness, it's like our emotional and thought life is the waterfall. Just whatever it is. And their premise is, as we learn meditative spirituality, to some degree you can kind of name it and you don't have to stop it. That's one of the big learning points I've had is, I'm feeling, I don't know, mad or something. And so I'm feeling mad. What they say is, in meditation what you say is, welcome feeling mad. And you don't, whereas if you don't do that, you have this constant sense something's bugging me and I don't want to feel that way, so I shove it down. You don't want to feel mad. And even in my own beloved Christian tradition, even preaching I've done, I realize a lot of it's sort of battling bad stuff. Like you feel mad, you need to forgive people. Figure out how to forgive people. And of course, it's very important, and I do not dismiss that. Please forgive people. But that said, realizing that part of it is just like there's a whole other side of it of just like saying, well, sometimes people feel mad, and that's cool, and I don't have to fight it. I can just say, I can name it, welcome it in, and then see what happens next. And somehow that's been very helpful.
Yeah, it's truth. Right?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of, we want to believe that we're good people.
Right.
And so good people shouldn't be mad.
Right.
And so I need to stop that. I need to stop being. But that creates this need for us to be superheroes all the time, right? Like
right.
We have to stop the bus
right.
with all the strength within inside of us.
Absolutely.
We can't. And so being able to say, it's true, I'm mad. I feel really mad. I don't know what to do with all this mad that I feel, can help a little bit. It's good. It's good stuff. Is there anything else that you would want to tell everybody or impart?
I don't know. If there's one thing I've also learned, I don't know if I would tell this to my younger self, is that I am as hopeful and as probably encouraged despite challenge in my life right now as ever. I feel it maybe more than ever. And so that's all great. I don't know that I feel as wise as I once felt. I think
such a bummer.
If you were to talk to me 20 years ago, I would have probably had a good closing word of wisdom of like, you really need to think about this, and I would have given it in a very winsome way, but it would have been there. Whereas now I think, boy, I'm glad to be alive. I'm glad to know God. I'm glad to have friends like yourself. And so maybe that's my imparting word is, I don't know, feels good to be glad for stuff.
Yeah.
If I have any other wisdom, that would be a part of it.
No, I like it because there is this reality that life is long.
Yes.
Life is longer than your own life.
Right.
Because we're part of this string of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to enjoy and to move forward and hope is a really important aspect.
See, there was wisdom.
There was.
We just had to wait for it, and then
yeah.
boom.
That's right. So I thank you, and it's great to be, I'm not usually in this setting, so it's great to be here in California for a hot second.
Yes, little bougainvillea behind us, not quite as full of bloom as it sometimes is. You get a little burst of pink.
Yes. So we just have to capture this, really take it in, because this won't be my setting probably for a long time. So
Very good.
thank you very much for being here.
A pleasure.
And thank you to all of you. And I will definitely put links to all of this in the description, so those will come up in a few hours. But hopefully this does inspire you to think a little bit about what's going on in me, what do I care about, who's around that I could partner with and journey with, and all that good jazz. So thank you so much, and I will see you again soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.